In this video, we're going to talk about functions as objects. In JavaScript, functions are objects, and so we're going to look at what that means. Here's a definition of a function called speak something. We've seen this kind of construction before. You just use the word function, followed by a space, followed by the name of the function and its definition. And so all this does is just take this what, and then log it to the console 10 times using a for loop. Now, I can rewrite this function definition in a different way. In this version, I'm creating a variable called speak something, and then I'm assigning to that what's called an anonymous function. The actual function definition inside the curly braces is the same, but you can see here the function, it's just function followed by the parameters. There's no function name here, so it's a function with no name, hence it's called an anonymous function. And for our purposes, these two constructions are basically equivalent, but they illustrate the idea that a function is actually an object. It can be passed around as a value in JavaScript. So that means that you can feed functions into other functions as arguments. And why would you want to do that? Well, I'll give you an example. When you're working with JavaScript on the web, there's a global window object. All global variables are properties of the window object, and there are a bunch of functions that are built into the window object. One of them is called setTimeout. And this is a function that takes as its first argument a function. So what this function does is it sets a timer after which a function will execute. And so for its first argument, it takes that actual function. So in this case, if I wanted to run speak something after a certain time, I'd feed it as the first argument into setTimeout, just like this. So I'm taking a function, it can be defined either of these ways, and I'm passing it in as a value. And then for setTimeout, I add the number of milliseconds after which I want this function to execute. If you've ever worked with another programming language, this could be quite interesting to look at. You're actually taking a function and passing it as a value. Functions are all objects in JavaScript. They actually inherit from a global function object, which is spelled like this with a leading capital F. But that's just a technical detail. The important thing to note is that functions are objects, and you can do stuff like this with them. So let's actually bring this code over to our console and put it in. Watch what happens. This fires 10 times. Now, I didn't actually pass the what argument into this version of speak something, which doesn't have a default argument provided. So we just get undefined 10 times. But you can see, after 5 seconds, it fired 10 times. This 10 here is an implementational detail of the way the Chrome and other WebKit inspectors work. If you get the same thing multiple times, it'll just increment this number as many times as it happens. Otherwise, your console window would just fill up with junk. So now you can see that you can pass functions into other functions, like this. Another thing that you can do with functions, of course, is just like setTimeout is here, it's a member of the window object. You can create your own objects and assign anonymous functions as members of that object. This is what happens all over the place in JavaScript. That's how a lot of things that are built in are defined. So I could define an object, call it just object for now. And then for its only property, I could add a property called function, and then define here an anonymous function, which then does nothing but say log to the console a little message like this. So you can see I'm using this function as a value again. So now if I invoke obj.function like this, I get back my message. So the key lesson here is that functions are objects and they can be passed around as values, just like any other value in JavaScript. You may see this often in terms of window.setTimeout, but it's used all over the place. You may not use it yourself in your initial forays into using JavaScript, but note that you can see constructions like this with anonymous functions, especially when we get into using jQuery. You'll see anonymous functions all the time. So whether they have names or not, functions do get passed around to other functions and used in objects all over the place in JavaScript.